Deshaun Mitchell's hands trembled. He stared at the check for $50,000, laying on the white linen tablecloth between him and the man he had just finished screaming at 30 minutes earlier. The entire dining room of the Crown Room had gone silent. Every patron and staff member watching this impossible scene unfold in real time. "Accept it or don't. The choice is yours," Travis Kelce said calmly, his voice carrying none of the anger Deshaun knew he deserved. "But understand that this isn't charity. This is an investment in the man you could become, not the man you showed me tonight." Deshaun's eyes darted around the restaurant, taking in the sea of faces staring at him with expressions ranging from shock to curiosity to judgment. His co-worker Bristol stood frozen by the kitchen door, her hand still covering her mouth in disbelief. Jarek, the manager who had pushed him to this breaking point, lurked near the host station with his arms crossed and a smug expression that suggested he was already planning Deshaun's termination. The check represented more money than Deshaun had ever seen in one place. More than enough to cover Cadence's medical bill, their overdue rent, the car payment they had been dodging for 3 months. More than enough to change everything that had been crushing him slowly the past year. But accepting it meant admitting that his explosion had been wrong. It meant acknowledging that he had just spent 10 minutes verbally destroying an innocent customer who had walked into the restaurant looking for nothing more than a quiet dinner. It meant facing the fact that his anger had finally found the worst possible target at the worst possible moment. "I need you to understand something," Travis continued, leaning forward slightly. 30 minutes ago, you called me trash. You told me I didn't belong here. You questioned my ability to pay for a meal and suggested I go to McDonald's instead. You did this in front of a room full of people without knowing anything about me except what you assumed based on how I was dressed. The words hit Deshaun like physical blows, each one a perfect replay of the verbal assault he had unleashed. He remembered every syllable, every sneer, every moment of satisfaction felt while tearing into this stranger who had committed no crime other than walking through the door at the exact moment when Deshaun's frustration finally boiled over. "But here's what you didn't know," Travis said, his voice still eerily calm. 20 minutes after you finished telling me I was worthless, I found out why you exploded. I learned about your girlfriend's medical bills, your rent situation, the way management here treats you. I discovered that you've been working double shifts for 8 months, trying to keep your heads above water while getting passed over for every decent table assignment. Deshaun felt his stomach drop. How could this stranger possibly know those details about his life? Travis seemed to read his confusion. Word travels fast in a place like this, when people think someone just committed career suicide. Your co-worker Bristol told me everything while you were in the bathroom, trying to figure out if you still had a job. The restaurant continued to hold its collective breath. Even the kitchen staff had emerged to witness whatever was about to happen next. Travis picked up the check and held it at eye level, making sure everyone could see it clearly. "So now you have a choice, Deshaun. You can take this money and disappear into the night, probably never learning anything from what happened here, or you can take it and prove that a good man made one terrible mistake, not that a terrible man showed his true color." Deshaun stared at the check, then at Travis Kelce, then at the 50 pairs of eyes watching him make the most important decision of his life. How had 30 seconds of explosive anger led to this impossible moment? 8 hours earlier, Deshaun Mitchell had walked into the Crown Room with the same desperate hope that had carried him through every shift for the past 8 months. Tonight would be different. Tonight he would finally get assigned to one of the high-roller tables, where business executives and celebrities dropped tips that could cover a month of expenses in a single evening. Tonight, his luck would change. The Crown Room represented the pinnacle of fine dining in Kansas City, a place where reservations were made weeks in advance, and the wine list included bottles that cost more than most people's monthly rent. Deshaun had been working there for 2 years, watching other servers walk away with hundreds of dollars in tips, while he consistently got stuck with the smaller tables near the kitchen, where families ordered carefully from the lower end of the menu and left 15% tips on modest checks. "Mitchell, you're on sections 4 and 5 tonight," Jarek Thompson announced during the pre-shift meeting, consulting his clipboard with the theatrical authority of someone who enjoyed wielding his small measure of power. Section 4 and 5 were the restaurant equivalent of Siberia. Cramped tables with poor views, where the lighting was slightly too dim and the acoustics carried every clatter from the dish. Deshaun felt his jaw tighten, but he forced himself to nod professionally. What about table 12? The Harrison party specifically requested me last time they were here. Table 12 was prime real estate, positioned near the windows with a perfect view of the city skyline, the kind of spot where wealthy regulars conducted business deals over $300 bottles of wine. Jarek glanced up from his clipboard with the dismissive expression he reserved for such requests. I need someone with more experience handling that level of clientele tonight. Davidson will take table 12. He gestured toward Brad Davidson, a 24-year-old server who had been working at the restaurant for 6 months and whose primary qualification seemed to be his ability to discuss golf and private schools with equal enthusiasm. More experience? Deshaun couldn't keep the edge out of his voice entirely. Jarek, I've been here longer than half the staff. I know that wine list better than anyone except Bristol. The Harrison party literally asked for me by name. And I need Davidson on table 12, Jarek replied, his tone suggesting the conversation was over. You can work your way up to the premium sections, Mitchell. Just focus on providing excellent service where you're assigned. The coded language wasn't lost on anyone in the room. Work your way up was restaurant speak for know your place. Deshaun had been working his way up for 2 years, watching newer servers leapfrog past him to the lucrative sections while he remained trapped in the restaurant's equivalent of the minor league. Bristol Hughes, a veteran server who had witnessed this dynamic play out countless times over her 10 years at the Crown Room, caught Deshaun's eye and shook her head slightly. At 53, Bristol had seen enough workplace politics to recognize a rigged game when she saw one. She had tried mentoring Deshaun, teaching him the subtle art of fine dining service, but they both understood that certain barriers existed that had nothing to do with competence or experience. As the staff dispersed to prepare for the evening service, Deshaun pulled out his phone and stared at the text message that had been haunting him all day. Second notice. Rent due in 48 hours or eviction proceedings begin. Below that, an earlier message from Cadence. Pharmacy says insurance denied the prescription again. We need $400 for this month's medication, or I have to skip doses. Cadence Washington had been Deshaun's girlfriend for 3 years, a relationship that had flourished when they were both working steady jobs and had seemingly simple dreams about building a life together. She had been laid off from her position as a medical office coordinator 4 months ago when the practice downsized, and her unemployment benefits barely covered groceries, let alone the expensive medications she needed to manage her autoimmune condition. Deshaun calculated quickly in his head, a mental exercise he performed dozens of times each day. His base pay from the restaurant was barely above minimum wage, designed around the assumption that tips would make up the difference. Working sections 4 and 5, he could expect to earn maybe $150 in tips on a good night. After taxes and tip out to the support staff, he would take home roughly $120. Even working 6 days a week, it wasn't enough to cover their basic expenses, let alone Cadence's medical costs. The first customers began arriving at 6 o'clock, and Deshaun threw himself into his work with the professionalism that had kept him employed despite the systemic inequity he faced. He memorized each table's preference, anticipated needs before they were voiced, and maintained the gracious demeanor that fine dining demanded, even when customers treated him like an invisible servant. By 8:30, he had served 12 tables and earned $87 in tip. At the same time, he watched Brad Davidson serve 4 tables in the premium section and overheard him discussing his $200 evening with another server. The mathematics of inequality were brutally simple. Davidson would make more in 1 night than Deshaun typically earned in 3. Table 18 wants to speak with a manager about their wine, Bristol informed him as she passed by carrying a tray of desserts. The husband says his Bordeaux tastes off. Deshaun sighed and approached table 18, where a middle-aged couple sat looking irritated. The man held up his wine glass with the expression of someone who felt personally victimized by its contents. "This wine is terrible," the man announced loudly enough for neighboring tables to hear. "I don't know if it's corked or just cheap, but I'm not paying premium prices for swill. Get me something drinkable." Deshaun examined the bottle, which was from a respected vineyard, and showed no signs of being compromised. The wine was perfectly fine. The customer was simply asserting dominance by creating a problem that required staff to scramble to fix it. "I'd be happy to have our sommelier taste it, sir, or we could try a different selection from the same price range." "I want to speak to your manager," the man said dismissive. "Maybe someone with authority can figure out how to run a restaurant properly." 20 minutes later, Jarek had comped the wine, offered a free dessert, and personally selected a replacement bottle while treating the complainers like valued customers whose feedback was essential to the restaurant's success. Deshawn watched the performance knowing that his section would be blamed for the incident in tomorrow's shift meeting, regardless of the fact that the wine had been perfectly fine. By 9 o'clock, his frustration had reached a dangerous level. Every small indignity of the evening had accumulated into a weight pressed against his chest, making it difficult to maintain the smile that customers expected. When he saw Jarek assign the evening's final VIP table to another server, despite having promised it to whoever was performing best, something inside Deshawn finally cracked. He was wiping down table 6 when the front door opened, and a young black man in jeans and a simple sweater walked in alone, looking around uncertainly, as if he wasn't sure he was in the right place. Deshawn saw him standing there and felt 8 months of accumulated rage suddenly find its target. The hostess was busy seating another party, so the casually dressed customer stood waiting near the entrance, occasionally checking his phone while taking in the elegant atmosphere of the crown room. He looked to be in his late 20s, athletic build, with an easy confidence that suggested he was comfortable in his own skin, despite being underdressed for the restaurant's usual clientele. Deshawn approached him with every intention of providing normal, professional service, but something about the man's relaxed demeanor triggered the anger that had been building all evening. Here was someone who clearly didn't understand the significance of a place like the Crown Room, someone who probably had no idea what it was like to work double shifts just to survive while watching other people casually spend more on dinner than he made in a week. "Can I help you?" Deshawn asked, his tone already carrying an edge that would have served as a warning to anyone paying attention. "Yeah, I was hoping to get a table for one," the customer replied politely. "I know it's pretty busy, so if there's a wait, that's totally fine." "A table for one," Deshawn repeated, looking the man up and down with obvious disdain. "Sir, this is the Crown Room. We're not exactly set up for casual dining. Our average entree is $45, and most of our customers make reservations weeks in advance." The customer seemed confused by the hostile reception, but maintained his polite demeanor. "Oh, okay. I didn't realize reservations were required. If you're fully booked, I can definitely come back another time." "Look, man," Deshawn said, his voice rising slightly as 8 months of suppressed frustration began to pour out, "I'm trying to save you some embarrassment here. This isn't McDonald's or Applebee's. People come here to celebrate anniversaries and close business deals. Maybe try somewhere more in your price range." Several nearby diners had begun to notice the exchange, their conversations quieting as they sensed conflict brewing. The customer's expression shifted from confusion to hurt. He still seemed determined to diffuse the situation. "I understand this is an upscale restaurant," he said carefully. "I can afford to eat here. I just didn't know about the dress code. If you'd prefer, I can leave and come back another time when I'm dressed more appropriately." But Deshawn was past the point of rational thinking. Every slight, every passed-over promotion, every night of counting tip money and coming up short had crystallized into this moment. "Dressed more appropriately?" He laughed bitterly. "Dude, this isn't about clothes. This is about understanding what kind of establishment this is. We get celebrities, politicians, business executives, people who know how to conduct themselves in a fine dining environment." "I think there's been a misunderstanding," the customer tried again, his voice remaining calm despite the increasingly personal nature of the attack. "I'm not trying to cause any problems. I just wanted to grab dinner. And I'm trying to explain to you that grabbing dinner isn't what happens here," Deshawn snapped. "This is a destination restaurant. People don't just wander in off the street because they're hungry. Maybe you should try somewhere that's more suited to people like you." The phrase, "people like you," hung in the air with unmistakable implication. The customer's face hardened slightly, but instead of escalating the confrontation, he seemed to withdraw into himself, as if he had encountered this type of treatment before and knew how to survive it. "People like me," he repeated quietly, more to himself than to Deshawn. "Yeah, People who think they can just show up anywhere without understanding the environment they're walking into, Deshaun continued, his voice growing louder as other diners began openly staring at the scene. This is Kansas City's premier fine dining establishment. We have standards here. We have expectations. Bristol appeared at Deshaun's shoulder, her face pale with alarm as she realized what was happening. "Deshaun," she hissed under her breath. "What are you doing?" But Deshaun was beyond hearing warnings or advice. Months of financial pressure, workplace discrimination, and watching his girlfriend suffer because they couldn't afford proper health care had created a perfect storm of rage that finally found an outlet. "Sir, I think what my colleague is trying to say," Bristol began diplomatically, attempting to salvage the situation, "is that we're experiencing high demand tonight, but if you'd like to wait for a table—" "No," Deshaun interrupted, his professional mask completely abandoned. "What I'm trying to say is exactly what I said. Some people understand fine dining culture, and some people don't. Some people know how to dress for an upscale restaurant, and some people think they can walk into anywhere wearing whatever they want." The customer stood silently for a moment, absorbing the full weight of the public humiliation being inflicted on him. Other diners had stopped eating entirely, some pulling out phones to record the increasingly dramatic scene. The hostess had abandoned her station and was frantically trying to signal Jarek from across the restaurant. "I understand," the customer said finally, his voice steady but carrying an undertone of deep disappointment. "I'll leave." "That's probably for the best," Deshaun replied, feeling a sick satisfaction at having successfully expelled what he saw as a threat to the restaurant's standard. "There are plenty of casual dining options in the area that would be a better fit." The customer nodded slowly and turned toward the door. But before he could take more than a few steps, Jarek appeared with the speed of someone whose career was flashing before his eyes. "Excuse me, sir," Jarek said breathlessly, rushing past Deshaun to intercept the departing customer. "I am so sorry about this misunderstanding. Please don't leave. We would be honored to seat you immediately." Deshaun watched in confusion as his manager, who had spent the entire evening reinforcing the restaurant's supposed standard and hierarchies, suddenly began treating the casually dressed customer like visiting royalty. "It's really okay," the customer said to Jarek. "Your server explained that this restaurant caters to a specific clientele, and I respect that. I'll find somewhere else to eat." "No, no, no," Jarek insisted, shooting a venomous look at Deshaun that promised severe consequences. "There has been a terrible misunderstanding. We would be delighted to accommodate you. Our best table is available right now." "Why are you kissing up to this guy?" Deshaun demanded, his anger now redirected at his manager's apparent hypocrisy. "5 minutes ago you were lecturing me about maintaining standards and knowing our clientele. Now you're falling all over yourself for someone who couldn't even bother to put on a dress shirt?" The entire restaurant had gone silent. Even the kitchen staff had emerged to witness the unprecedented scene of a server openly challenging management while insulting a customer. Jarek's face had gone completely white. "Mitchell, you're fired. Clean out your locker and leave immediately." "Wait," the customer said quietly, raising his hand. "Don't fire him, please." Everyone froze. Jarek, Deshaun, Bristol, and 50 dining room patrons all stared at the man who had just been subjected to a prolonged verbal assault and was now intervening to save his attacker's job. "Sir, with all due respect, this employee has been completely inappropriate," Jarek sputtered. "He doesn't represent the values of this establishment." "Maybe not," the customer replied, looking directly at Deshaun with an expression that was impossible to read. "But I'd like to hear why he felt the need to treat me that way. I think there might be more to this story." The silence in the crown room was so complete that the only sound was the gentle hum of the air conditioning system. Deshaun stared at the customer he had just finished humiliating, completely unable to process why this man was attempting to save his job instead of demanding his immediate termination. "You want to know why?" Deshaun asked, his voice cracking slightly as the adrenaline of his outburst began to wear off. "You want to know why I treated you like that?" "I do," the customer replied simply. Deshaun laughed bitterly, gesturing around the elegant dining room. "Because I've been working in this place for 2 years, busting my ass every single night, watching other people get the good table, the good tip, the good opportunities while I get stuck in the corner serving people who leave 10% tips on $30 checks." His voice began rising again, fueled by months of suppressed frustration, finally finding an outlet. Because my girlfriend is sick and we can't afford her medication, and our rent is due in 2 days, and I'm working 6 days a week just to stay slightly behind on our bill. Because I watched Brad Davidson make more money tonight serving 4 tables than I made serving 12. Deshaun, Bristol whispered urgently, trying to signal him to stop talking before he made his situation worse. But Deshaun was past caring about consequence. You want to know why I took it out on you? Because you walked in here looking like you didn't have a care in the world, like you could just decide to have dinner at Kansas City's most expensive restaurant on a whim. And I hate that. I hate that some people get to live like that, while other people work themselves to death just to survive. The customer listened to this explanation without interrupting, his expression gradually shifting from confusion to understanding. When Deshaun finished, he nodded slowly. So you saw me as someone who had what you couldn't have, the customer said. Someone who represented everything that was wrong with your situation. Yeah, Deshaun admitted, suddenly feeling exhausted. That's exactly what I saw. And you decided to punish me for it. I guess I did. The customer was quiet for a long moment, seeming to weigh his response carefully. Around them, the restaurant remained frozen in anticipation of whatever would happen next. I understand that feeling, the customer said finally. The anger, the frustration, the sense that the system is rigged against you. I've felt all of those things. Sure you have, Deshaun replied sarcastically. I bet your biggest problem is deciding which car to drive to dinner. Instead of taking offense, the customer smiled sadly. My biggest problem when I was your age was figuring out how to pay for college while taking care of my younger brother after our mom died. I worked 3 jobs, including washing dishes at a restaurant where the servers treated me exactly the way you just treated me. Deshaun felt something shift in his chest, a crack in the wall of rage that had been protecting him from having to face what he had actually done. The difference is, the customer continued, I learned that taking my anger out on innocent people only made my situation worse. It didn't solve any of my problems. It just created new ones and turned me into someone I didn't recognize. Who are you? Deshaun asked quietly, suddenly aware that this conversation had moved far beyond a simple customer service. Before the customer could answer, Bristol appeared at Deshaun's side, her face pale with a mixture of horror and disbelief. Deshaun, she whispered, her voice barely audible. Do you have any idea who you just spent the last 10 minutes screaming at? What are you talking about? Deshaun asked, though something in Bristol's expression was making his stomach drop. That's Travis Kelce, she said, pointing at the customer with a trembling hand. Number 87 for the Kansas City Chiefs, one of the most famous athletes in this city. You just told Travis Kelce that he doesn't belong in a Kansas City restaurant. Buddy, the words hit Deshaun like a physical blow. Every drop of blood seemed to drain from his face as he stared at the man he had been insulting for the past 10 minutes. Travis Kelce, the tight end who had helped bring a Super Bowl championship to Kansas City. Travis Kelce, whose jersey was worn by half the city on Sunday. Travis Kelce, who was beloved by millions of fans and was quite possibly the worst person in Kansas City to verbally assault in front of a room full of witnesses. Oh God, Deshaun whispered, feeling his knees go weak. Oh my God. Travis watched this realization wash over Deshaun's face with something that looked almost like sympathy. Now you know who I am, he said quietly. But 5 minutes ago, when you didn't know, you treated me like garbage because you made assumptions about who I was based on how I looked. Do you see the problem with that? Deshaun couldn't speak. His mind was racing through every word he had said, every insult he had hurled, every assumption he had made. He had just committed career suicide in the most public way possible, insulting one of Kansas City's most beloved figures in front of dozens of witnesses who were probably already posting videos of the encounter on social media. I'm so sorry, he managed to whisper. I didn't know. I mean, that doesn't excuse it, but I had no idea who you were. And why does that matter? Travis asked. Should you only treat people with respect if they're famous? Should your level of courtesy depend on how much money someone makes or how recognizable they are? The question hung in the air like an accusation. Deshaun knew the answer, and he knew that Travis knew and they both understood that his apology had actually made his behavior worse by suggesting that celebrity status was what made his treatment unacceptable. You're right, Deshaun said, his voice barely audible. It doesn't matter who you are. I was wrong. I was completely wrong, and I'm sorry. Jarek had been standing frozen throughout this exchange, calculating the potential damage to the restaurant's reputation and his own career prospect. "Mr. Kelce, please accept our sincerest apologies," he began, launching into what was clearly a rehearsed crisis management script. "This employee will be terminated immediately, and we will do everything in our power to make this right." "Actually," Travis said, holding up his hand to stop Jarek's panicked speech, "I'd like to talk to Deshaun privately for a few minutes. Is there somewhere we could sit down?" "Of course," Jarek replied quickly. "You can use the private dining room. Anything you need." "I don't understand," Deshaun said, as Travis gestured toward the back of the restaurant. "Why do you want to talk to me? I just humiliated you in front of all these people. You should hate me." Travis paused at the entrance to the private dining room and looked back at Deshaun with an expression that was impossible to read. "Because 5 years ago, I was you. I was angry, I was struggling, and I took it out on people who didn't deserve it. The only difference is that someone took the time to teach me a better way to handle that anger instead of just writing me off as a lost cause. And now you want to teach me? I want to give you a choice," Travis replied. "You can let this moment destroy you, or you can let it change you, but that decision is entirely up to you." The private dining room at the Crown Room was designed for intimate business meetings and special occasions, with rich mahogany paneling and soft lighting that created an atmosphere of confidential importance. Deshaun sat across from Travis Kelce at a small round table, still struggling to process the surreal nature of the situation. "Before we talk about what just happened," Travis began, "I want you to understand something about me. I wasn't born wealthy. I didn't grow up with advantages. My mom worked multiple jobs to keep our family afloat, and there were plenty of times when I felt exactly the anger you showed out there tonight." Deshaun listened in stunned silence as one of Kansas City's most successful athletes described a childhood that sounded remarkably similar to his current circumstance. "When I was in college, I worked at a sporting goods store," Travis continued. "The manager there was this guy who seemed to enjoy making my life miserable. He'd schedule me for the worst shifts, give me the hardest assignments, and find reasons to write me up for minor infractions. I was convinced he was racist, and maybe he was, but I let that anger build up inside me until it poisoned everything." "What happened?" Deshaun asked quietly. "I exploded at a customer who complained about a return policy. Just went off on this middle-aged woman who was trying to return some cleats that didn't fit her son, called her entitled, told her she was everything wrong with society, really let her have it in front of a store full of people." Travis paused, seeming to relive the memory. "Turns out she was the mother of one of my teammates. She recognized me and called the coach. I nearly got kicked off the team, lost my scholarship, threw away everything I had worked for because I couldn't control my anger for 5 minutes." "But you didn't get kicked off the team," Deshaun observed. "No, I didn't, because the coach sat me down and explained something that changed my life. He said that my anger wasn't the problem. The circumstances that created my anger were legitimate. The problem was that I was using my anger as a weapon against innocent people instead of using it as fuel to change my situation." Deshaun felt a flicker of recognition in Travis's words. "What do you mean?" "I mean that being angry about injustice is healthy. Being angry about discrimination is appropriate. Being angry about working hard and not getting fair treatment is completely reasonable. The question is what you do with that anger." Travis leaned forward slightly, his voice taking on the intensity of someone sharing hard-won wisdom. "You can use it to tear other people down, which is what you did tonight, and what I did in that sporting goods store. Or you can use it to build yourself up, to fuel the work it takes to change your circumstances and help other people change theirs." "Easy for you to say," Deshaun replied, though without the hostility that had characterized his earlier comment. "You made it. You're successful now. You don't have to worry about rent or medical bills or getting stuck with the worst tables every night." "You're right," Travis agreed. "I don't have those worries anymore. But I remember what they felt like, and I remember thinking that successful people couldn't possibly understand my struggle. I was wrong about that." Travis pulled out his phone and showed Deshaun a photo of a young man in a graduation cap and gown. "This is Market. 3 years ago, he was working at a hotel where I was staying, and he went off on me in the lobby because he thought I was just another entitled athlete making his life difficult. Sound familiar?" Deshaun studied the photo. What happened to him? He's graduating from hospitality management school next month with a job already lined up at a major hotel chain. We've stayed in touch since that night, and he's told me that learning to channel his anger productively was the turning point in his life. You helped him? I gave him an opportunity to help himself. Same opportunity I'm about to offer you. Travis reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a check, placing it on the table between them. I'm going to write you a check that will cover your girlfriend's medical expenses and your overdue bill, but accepting it comes with conditions. Deshaun stared at the check, barely able to process what he was hearing. What kind of condition? First, you complete 100 hours of community service at Kansas City Children's Hospital. You'll work directly with families who are dealing with medical crises while struggling financially. You'll see firsthand how people handle impossible situations with grace and dignity. And second, you come back to work here and prove that tonight was an aberration, not a pattern. I've already spoken to the restaurant owner about keeping you employed, but you'll be on probation. One more incident like tonight, and you're finished in this industry. Deshaun felt his chest tighten with a mixture of hope and terror. Why would you do this? Why would you help someone who treated you the way I did? Because someone did it for me, Travis replied simply, and because I see potential in you that you don't see in yourself yet. You're articulate, you're passionate, and underneath all that anger, you actually care about providing good service. Those are valuable qualities if they're properly directed. What if I can't change? What if I'm just an angry person who takes it out on innocent people? Travis smiled for the first time since entering the restaurant. Then you'll fail, and you'll face the consequences of that failure. But I don't think that's who you really are. I think you're someone who got overwhelmed by circumstances and made a terrible mistake. The question is whether you're willing to do the work to make sure it doesn't happen again. Deshaun looked around the elegant private dining room, thinking about Cadence at home, worrying about money and medicine, about the eviction notice in his pocket, about the bills that kept piling up no matter how hard he worked. Then he thought about the look on Travis's face when he had called him trash, about the other diners who had witnessed his meltdown, about the person he had become in that moment of uncontrolled rage. If I accept this, he said slowly, I want to earn it. I don't want charity. It's not charity, Travis corrected. It's an investment. And like any investment, it comes with expectations and accountability. You'll report to me monthly on your community service progress. You'll meet with a counselor to work on anger management techniques. And you'll mentor other young service workers who are dealing with similar pressure. You've already thought this through. I told you, this isn't my first time having this conversation. The difference is that Marcus accepted the challenge and changed his life. Some other people I've made similar offers to decided it was too much work and chose to stay angry instead. See, Deshaun took a deep breath, feeling as if he were standing at the edge of a cliff, with the choice to either jump toward an uncertain future or remain trapped in his current circumstance. There's something else, Travis added. This arrangement stays between us and the people who need to know for professional purpose. I don't want you feeling like you owe me gratitude for the rest of your life, and I don't want other people treating you differently because of our connection. What do you get out of this? Deshaun asked. The satisfaction of knowing that someone who had a terrible night got a second chance to become the person he was meant to be, Travis replied, and maybe, if it works out, the knowledge that you'll do the same thing for someone else someday. 6 months later, Deshaun Mitchell stood in the main dining room of the Crown Room, watching a new server named Jerome struggle with a difficult customer at table 8. The young man's frustration was visible in the tension of his shoulders and the slight tremor in his voice as he attempted to explain why the kitchen couldn't accommodate a last-minute menu modification for a party of 12. I understand your frustration, sir, Jerome was saying, his professional composure beginning to crack under the pressure of the customer's increasingly aggressive demand. But our kitchen staff needs advance notice for dietary modifications on large parties. Deshaun recognized the warning signs immediately. The clenched jaw, the forced smile, the way Jerome's hands had begun to shake slightly as the customer continued berating him in front of his colleagues and other diners. It was the same powder keg of rage and humiliation that had exploded 6 months earlier when Deshaun had encountered Travis Kelce. Jerome, Deshaun said quietly, appearing at the young server's shoulder. Why don't you let me handle this table? You can take my section for the rest of the evening. The relief on Jerome's face was immediate and profound. "Thank you," he whispered, stepping back from the table before his anger could escalate into something career-ending. Deshaun approached table 8 with the calm confidence that had become his trademark since returning from his community service at Kansas City Children's Hospital. "Good evening, folks. I understand there's been some confusion about dietary accommodation. Let me see what we can work out." 20 minutes later, he had negotiated a solution that satisfied the demanding customer while respecting the kitchen's capability. Jerome watched from across the dining room with obvious admiration as Deshaun transformed a potentially explosive situation into a positive experience for everyone involved. "How did you do that?" Jerome asked later as they cleaned their sections after the dinner rush. "That guy was ready to tear my head off, and you had him laughing by the end of the meal." "Experience," Deshaun replied, thinking about the countless hours he had spent at the Children's Hospital watching families navigate impossible circumstances with grace and patience, and understanding that angry customers usually aren't angry about the food or service. They're angry about something else entirely, and they're taking it out on the nearest available target, which is usually us, Jerome said with a bitter laugh. "Which is usually us," Deshaun agreed. "But here's the thing I learned. You can either let their anger infect you, or you can choose to respond with something better. The choice is always yours." Jerome studied Deshaun's face with curiosity. "You talk like someone who learned that lesson the hard way." "I did," Deshaun admitted. "I made a mistake here 6 months ago that almost cost me everything. Someone gave me a second chance, and I've spent every day since then trying to prove I deserved it." The conversation was interrupted by Bristol, who approached with the evening's tip reports. "Deshaun, you had the highest per-table average again tonight, and corporate called. They want to interview you for the assistant manager position at the new location downtown." Deshaun felt a surge of pride mixed with disbelief. 6 months ago, he had been relegated to the worst sections of the restaurant, struggling to make ends meet while watching other servers advance past. Now he was being considered for management position and serving as an unofficial mentor to newer staff members. "There's something else," Bristol continued, lowering her voice. "Jarek put in his 2 weeks' notice. Apparently, he got an offer from another restaurant group. But between you and me, I think the writing was on the wall after what happened with you and the new ownership policies about equal table assignment." The changes at the Crown Room had been gradual but significant. After Travis's conversation with the restaurant's owner about the incident, new policies had been implemented to ensure fair distribution of premium tables based on performance metrics rather than subjective manager preference. The old system of unofficial hierarchies and coded discrimination had been replaced with transparent assignment rotation that gave every server equal opportunity to earn higher tip. "Hey, Deshaun," Jerome said, still processing their earlier conversation, "what kind of mistake did you make 6 months ago, if you don't mind me asking?" Deshaun considered how to answer that question. He had kept his promise to Travis about maintaining discretion regarding their arrangement, but he had also learned the value of sharing his story when it could help others avoid similar pitfalls. "I let my anger and frustration build up until I took it out on an innocent customer," he said simply. "I made assumptions about who he was based on how he looked, and I treated him terribly in front of a room full of people. It was the worst moment of my professional life, and it could have been the end of my career." "What saved you?" "The customer I insulted turned out to be someone who understood what I was going through better than I understood it myself. Instead of destroying me, which he could have done easily, he offered me a chance to learn from my mistake and become better." Jerome shook his head in amazement. "That's incredible. Who was the customer?" "Someone who had been in my position before and knew that good people sometimes do terrible things when they're overwhelmed by circumstances they can't control," Deshaun replied, maintaining the privacy he had promised while still sharing the essential lesson. As they finished their closing duties, Deshaun reflected on how dramatically his life had changed since that terrible night 6 months ago. Cadence was healthy and working again, having found a position with better benefits that covered her medication. They had moved to a larger apartment and were beginning to plan for a future that included possibilities beyond mere survival. More importantly, Deshaun had discovered a sense of purpose that went beyond his own advancement. The community service hours at the Children's Hospital had opened his eyes to the resilience of families facing far greater challenges than his own, and the anger management counseling had taught him tools for channeling his emotions productively rather than destructively. "Deshaun," a familiar voice said from behind him as he prepared to leave for the evening. He turned to see Travis Kelce standing near the host station, dressed more formally than he had been 6 months earlier, but still carrying the same easy confidence that had initially triggered Deshaun's misplaced rage. "Travis," Deshaun said, genuinely pleased to see his unexpected mentor. "What brings you by tonight?" "Dinner with some teammates," Travis replied. "But I also wanted to check in and see how you're doing. Bristol tells me you're up for a promotion." "I am," Deshaun confirmed. "Assistant manager position at the new downtown location. It's exactly the kind of opportunity I've been working toward." "And how's the community service going?" "I finished my 100 hours last month, but I've kept volunteering. Those families taught me more about strength and grace than I learned in the rest of my life combined." Travis smiled with obvious satisfaction. "That's what I was hoping would happen. When you see people handling impossible situations with dignity, it puts your own challenges in perspective." "It does," Deshaun agreed. "I also wanted to thank you again for what you did that night. Not just the financial help, but the way you chose to see potential in me instead of just writing me off as someone who didn't deserve a second chance. You earned that second chance every day since then," Travis replied. "But there's something I want you to remember as you move forward in your career and your life." "What's that?" "The cycle doesn't end with you getting better. The real test of whether you learned the lesson is what you do when you encounter someone else who's where you were 6 months ago. Someone who's angry and frustrated and taking it out on the wrong people." Deshaun thought about Jerome's near explosion earlier that evening and the countless other young service workers he had observed struggling with similar pressures and frustration. "Actually," he said, "I think I'm already starting to understand what you mean. There's a server here who reminds me a lot of myself 6 months ago. Same anger, same sense that the system is rigged against, same tendency to look for someone to blame. And what are you going to do about that?" "The same thing you did for me," Deshaun replied without hesitation. "Give him a chance to learn that his anger isn't his enemy. It's just energy that needs to be redirected towards something constructive." Travis extended his hand a shake, but then pulled Deshaun into a brief embrace instead. "That's exactly what I was hoping you'd say. The real victory isn't just that you changed your life, it's that you're going to help other people change theirs." As Travis headed toward his table and Deshaun prepared to leave for the evening, he thought about the conversation he would have with Jerome tomorrow. It would be a difficult discussion, requiring honesty about his own failures and patience with someone else's anger, but it was also an opportunity to pass forward the grace he had received. Walking out into the Kansas City night, Deshaun reflected on the unexpected journey that had brought him from his lowest professional moment to a position of leadership and purpose. The anger that had once threatened to destroy his future had been transformed into a tool for helping others avoid the same mistakes he had made. 6 months ago, he had seen Travis Kelce as a symbol of everything he couldn't have. Now he understood that the real symbol wasn't success, or fame, or wealth. It was the choice to respond to someone else's worst moment with compassion instead of judgment, with opportunity instead of condemnation. As he drove home to Cadence and their future together, Deshaun smiled at the realization that the most important lesson he had learned wasn't about controlling his anger or managing his emotions. It was about recognizing that everyone deserves a second chance to become the person they were meant to be, and that sometimes the greatest privilege in life is being in a position to offer that chance to someone else. Tomorrow, he would begin that conversation with Jerome. The cycle of grace and redemption would continue, one transformed life at a time.